Johann's Gift to Christmas by Jack Richards. Illustrations by Len Norris. A long time ago, nearly 200 years ago in fact, just after the French Emperor Napoleon had fought wars all over Europe, a very special mouse was born in Oberndorf, a small village high in the Tyrolean mountains of Austria. He was one of a large family, and naming them all was a big chore for the parents. They named them Fritzy and Mitzi after aunts, and Franz and Joseph after uncles. They had almost run out of names before they noticed the quiet one sitting in the corner. "Well," said Father Mouse, who had been keeping count of them all on the links of his fine gold watch chain, "and what will this one be?" This little mouse seemed to confuse them all. He always seemed to be listening to something. Mother Mouse patted the silent little one on the head. "Let's call him Johann," she said. "He's such a gentle little fellow. The name seems to suit him somehow." "Johann," said Father Mouse, nodding his head wisely. "Johann. Very well, Johann it shall be." Johann, as he was now called, was quiet for a reason. He seemed to be always listening, and so he was. One day he awakened to find the air full of beautiful sound. Although Johann did not know what a church bell was, it was the ringing of the bell in the nearby church that so filled him with delight. All tumbled together with his brothers and sisters, he snuggled closer to his mother and listened as hard as he could. Shortly after, the bell stopped. Then he heard other lovely sounds, different ones all blended together. Johann felt as though he were floating on a cloud. This was the first time he had heard the organ in the church and the people singing happily. Johann never forgot it. He grew bigger and was allowed to play in the meadows with his brothers and sisters. He ran and leaped and scurried through the grass as merrily as any of them. But there was one thing that would stop Johann in his merry games, and that was music. He loved music, all kinds of music. Whenever the deep voices of the great mountain horns sang out across the valleys and along the rock cliffs, or when the happy people in their mountain meadows yodeled their echoing melodies to each other across the way, Johann sat very still and listened with all his might. His ears stretched up as far as possible, as if to take in all the music. His whiskers were very still. His bright little eyes glowed with happiness. He was happiest at the band concerts, where he could listen for hours to the grand pa-pas of the big brass horns and the tinkle of the glockenspiels. It was at one of these concerts that something happened which changed Johann's whole life. "Hrumph," said a gentle voice right behind Johann, but he didn't hear it. He was listening to a very entrancing part of the music in which the flutes sounded like 1,000 birds singing together in the forest. "Hrumph," said the gentle voice again, and this time Johann heard it. The band had stopped to rest, and the musicians were mopping their red faces with handkerchiefs, catching their breath, and smiling at the applause of the delighted audience. Johann turned around very quickly to see who had made the noise. An old mouse with a kindly twinkle in his eyes was standing behind him. He was very old. His whiskers were all white and drooped at the ends. His brown fur was full of silver-gray hairs. He peered down at Johann through wire-rimmed spectacles, much mended, perched far down on his nose. About his neck was a shabby muffler, so faded it was hard to tell it had once been a jolly red. "I beg your pardon?" asked Johann, for he was a very well-brought-up little mouse. "You must be the one they call Johann," said the old mouse in a quivery squeak. "Yes, I am, sir," said Johann politely. "I knew it because you were listening to the band so intently," said the old mouse. "I hear you love music." "Oh, yes, sir, I do," said Johann. "There is nothing that makes me feel good all over like music." "Ah, yes, I know what you mean," quavered the old mouse. "I, too, have loved music all my life. My name is Victor, and I would like you to hear some of my special music." "Oh, I would like that very much, if you please, sir," said Johann. "When can I hear it?" Let me see," said old Victor, tapping his cane on the ground. "Can you come tonight about sunset?" "Of course," said Johann instantly. "Very well," said Victor. "Meet me right here." Johann was on needles and pins the rest of the day. He could hardly wait. "What can this new kind of music be like? I wonder where it is," he asked himself. But at last it was sunset, and Johann scurried to the now deserted bandstand in the village square. Victor was waiting. "Come with me," he said. "It's not very far." And politely keeping pace with the slow steps of old Victor, Johann crossed to the other corner of the square, where he had never been. Johann kept thinking, "Oh, I do wish Victor would walk faster." But being well-mannered, he managed to keep his patience in check until they crept through a hole in the outer wall of a building. As soon as he was inside, Johann recognized the beautiful, soft music he had heard somewhere before. "What is it?" he squeaked with excitement. Old Victor smiled gently. "That is the schoolmaster, Herr Franz Xavier Gruber," he said. "He loves music too, and he comes to the church almost every day to practice and compose music." "Let's go closer," begged Johann. And the two crept quietly into the dark at the back of the church, well out of the circle of light shed by the candles by the organ. Johann had never heard anything as lovely as the music from the organ. It was all the instruments in the band, the mountain horns, the yodeling, all at once. And as the music poured out of the ring of candlelight, Johann closed his eyes in happiness. When he opened them again, he noticed for the first time a beautiful lady just dimly seen outside the light. Her face, perfectly still, seemed to be listening to the music too, and loving it as much as Johann. She seemed to be looking right at him, and he felt as if she knew how wonderful the music sounded to him. When the organist blew out the candles and left, Johann was fairly bursting with questions. Do you have this all to yourself every day?" he asked Victor. "Of course," said Victor. "Well, nearly every day. Often the villagers come to listen and sing with the music. That is when the bell rings." The bell! Suddenly Johann knew when he had heard that beautiful sound before. "And the beautiful lady?" asked Johann. "Is she here every day?" Victor wrinkled his brow. "The beautiful? Oh, you mean the wooden angel. She is carved from wood. She never moves, and she was here long before I became the church mouse." "A church mouse?" said Johann. "Is that what you are? What is a church mouse, please?" Drawing himself up as tall as his old legs would let him, Victor looked very serious. "A church mouse," he said, "is a very special kind of mouse. He lives in a church because he wants to. He is very poor, the poorest of all mice, because there is very little food in a church. In winter, the church is very cold most of the week. It is dark and lonely, for the carved angel never speaks." "Then why would anyone want to be a church mouse?" asked Johann, his whiskers quivering with curiosity, his little bright eyes snapping with eagerness. Why, you ask?" said old Victor rather snappingly. I should think you would know. Only the pastor, Herr Gruber, and I are here every day. I hear every note of music played on the organ. Wouldn't you think that was worth it?" "Oh, yes," said Johann. "I'm sorry, I didn't think. To be near the music all the time would be wonderful." "Ah," said old Victor with a deep sigh. "You love music as much as I do. I came here many years ago, and soon I must die. But then he said with a gentle smile. "I would not have wanted to live any other way." Johann said a polite goodbye and was delighted when Victor invited him to come back any time and visit. Johann vowed he would come soon and often. Johann made his way home much more slowly than his usual scurry, and at supper that night he was unusually quiet. It was a good supper. Johann's family lived in the cellar of the Burgermeister's home, and the food was always of the best and plentiful. "Are you sick, Johann?" asked his mother anxiously. "Were you naughty today, Johann?" asked his father, frowning sternly. "Or did you fall in love with that cute little mouse next door?" giggled his sister Antoinette, who was always teasing. "No," said Johann solemnly, not raising his eyes. "I went to visit the church today with old Victor, and I have decided what I want to become."
"Oh ho!" said his father with a chuckle. "And what is that?"
"A church mouse, if you please," Johann murmured through his whiskers.